"Take that thing off your head right now." Victoria Sterling's voice exploded like thunder through the elegant ballroom of the Charleston mansion, brutally cutting through the polite conversations of the guests. The delicate tinkling of crystal glasses ceased instantly. The refined murmurs of the southern elite transformed into heavy, embarrassing silence. But the venomous words weren't the worst part. It was the sudden, violent movement full of hatred when she lunged at Rania Hassan like a predator, attacking its prey. Before any of the 50 guests could react, Victoria's manicured hands, adorned with diamond rings that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime, grabbed Rania's delicate white hijab, the sacred fabric embroidered with golden threads that her grandmother had sewn in Malaysia decades ago, was brutally and deliberately torn from the young Muslim woman's head. Rania's dark, silky hair cascaded over her shoulders, exposing her before dozens of shocked witnesses who had never witnessed such cruelty in a refined social setting. The sacred hijab floated to the Italian marble floor like a wounded dove, its delicate edges spreading across the cold floor. Rania stood paralyzed, her hands instinctively flying to cover her head in a desperate gesture to preserve her religious modesty. Tears of humiliation and shock burned in her brown eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not there, not in front of them. Her lips trembled as she whispered a silent prayer in Arabic, seeking strength from Allah to endure that moment of public degradation. But what would happen in the next few minutes would forever transform 3 lives and send shockwaves through all of Charleston's elite. Because in that golden hall, filled with Austrian crystals and European paintings, a battle was about to begin. Not just between tradition and change, but between hatred and love, prejudice and faith, silence and courage. And at the center of this storm, a young Muslim woman from Malaysia would prove that dignity cannot be torn away, only temporarily lent to fear. Before continuing with this story that changed not just a family but an entire city, I need to know who is listening to me at this moment. Write in the comments exactly where you're watching from, your city, your state, your country. I want to know to what corner of the world this story of courage and transformation is reaching, because what you're about to hear isn't just about a young Muslim woman who faced prejudice. It's about how a single courageous action can create waves that cross continents, inspire changes, and prove that true love knows no boundaries of religion, culture, or social class. So tell me, where are you? Perhaps your answer will inspire someone on the other side of the world who needs to hear this story today. The silence that followed was more deafening than any scream could have been. It was as if the very air of the Sterling mansion had become dense, heavy with the gravity of what had just happened. Baccarat crystal glasses trembled in the gloved hands of shocked guests. Irish linen napkins fell forgotten on Chinese porcelain plates. Men in starched tuxedos stood open-mouthed. Their wives in haute couture dresses brought their hands to their chests in theatrical gestures of horror. All 60 pairs of eyes fixed on the devastating scene unfolding in the center of the ballroom. There stood Rania Hassan, 24 years old, daughter of a university professor from Kuala Lumpur, standing with her dark hair exposed against her religious and cultural will. Her delicate hands, which still carried the jasmine perfume she had worn since adolescence, trembled as she tried to instinctively cover her head. The simple navy blue dress she had carefully chosen to be respectful and discreet now seemed like a declaration of humility amid the ostentatious luxury around her. Victoria Sterling, 62 years of pure southern arrogance, held the torn hijab like a war trophy. Her icy blue eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction that she didn't try to disguise. The Tahitian pearl necklace around her neck, an heirloom from 4 generations of Sterling women, rose and fell with her breath agitated by the adrenaline of the attack. "You thought no one would notice," she hissed, her voice cutting through the French-scented air like a sharp razor. "Pretending to be a respectful and humble employee while seducing my son with your strange tricks and primitive rituals." The words were pure poison, distilled from decades of prejudice, privilege, and fear of the different. Each syllable was calculated to hurt, to reduce, to dehumanize. Isabella Montgomery, 31 years of icy beauty and golden ambition, sat at the main table among the most influential guests. An almost imperceptible smile curved her blood-red painted lips. Her macabre plan was working perfectly. She had planted the seeds of hatred in Victoria's heart for months, feeding every suspicion, every fear, every insecurity about the young Muslim woman's influence over Alexander. On the other side of the ballroom, near the French doors that led to the award-winning Rose Garden, Alexander Sterling stood paralyzed by shock. His 32 years of privilege and private school education hadn't prepared him to witness his own mother commit such a brutal act of religious and cultural violence. His fists clenched inside the pockets of his custom-made Italian tuxedo, his muscles tense under the fine fabric. His jaw tightened with a force that made his teeth ache, while an inner war exploded in his chest. Filial love fighting against moral outrage, family loyalty colliding with human justice. Grace Thompson, the 57-year-old housekeeper who had raised Alexander since he was a baby and who had become Rania's silent confidant in recent months, watched horrified from the corners of the ballroom. Her hands, calloused from decades serving the Sterling family, gripped the silver tray she carried, her knuckles turning white with tension. She had tried to warn Rania that something terrible was being plotted in the shadows of the mansion, but never imagined Victoria would reach this level of public and calculated cruelty. What none of those present knew was that this public humiliation, this violation of an innocent young woman's religious dignity, was about to trigger a revelation that would change not just their lives, but the very social structure of Charleston forever. Alexander Sterling crossed the ballroom in long, furious strides, his Italian leather shoes echoing against the polished marble like hammers hitting an anvil. The sound cut through the tense silence like blades, each step a declaration of war against the cruelty he had just witnessed. The guests automatically moved away, creating a human corridor between him and his mother, as if they sensed they were about to witness something historic. Their sun-bronzed Charleston faces were contorted in expressions that mixed shock, morbid curiosity, and nervous anticipation. Everyone expected Alexander to discreetly console Rania, perhaps apologize embarrassed by his mother's uncontrolled outburst, maybe take the young woman away from the invasive stares. That's how men of the Southern elite dealt with family scandals, with whispered diplomacy, minimal courtesy gestures, and silent damage control. But what Alexander did in the next seconds left all of Charleston literally breathless, their mouths open in collective astonishment. He stopped before Victoria Sterling like a gladiator facing a corrupt emperor, tore the sacred hijab from his mother's trembling hands with deliberate force and unquestionable authority. The delicate fabric, still warm from the heat of Rania's tears of humiliation, fluttered in his hands like a surrender flag. Then, to the absolute astonishment of every soul present in that golden ballroom, Alexander Sterling, heir to a billion-dollar empire, product of the finest aristocratic education, symbol of Southern white supremacy, knelt on the cold marble floor. His knees touched the floor with a dull sound that reverberated through the silence like a gunshot. He picked up every fiber of the torn hijab with the reverence of someone touching a sacred relic, his hands trembling not from fear, but from an emotion so deep it seemed to come from his soul. "Mother," his voice echoed through the ballroom, firm and clear as molten bronze carrying a moral authority he had never demonstrated before. "What you just did is unforgivable in the eyes of God and men." Alexander slowly stood up, holding Rania's hijab as if it were the most precious and sacred object in the universe. His hands, which had once held million-dollar contracts and glasses of Dom Perignon champagne, now trembled with the delicacy of someone handling something divine. He turned to Rania, his blue eyes, genetic inheritance of the Sterlings, shining with tears he didn't try to hide. The vulnerability on his face was raw, real, devastatingly human, amid the artificial luxury that surrounded them. "Forgive me, Rania," he said, his words laden with an emotion so genuine that some of the more sensitive guests felt tears pricking their own eyes. "Forgive my cowardice in the past months. Forgive my hesitation to defend you publicly. Forgive my family for the ignorance and cruelty you didn't deserve to endure." His voice broke slightly on the last word, revealing the pain he had carried in silence while watching the woman he loved being systematically tortured by his own mother. Then, to the astonishment that transcended anything Charleston had witnessed in its 3 centuries of social history, Alexander did something no Sterling had ever done. He turned to the crowd of Southern elite, oil magnates, plantation heirs, influential politicians, jewel-covered socialites, and declared with a voice that carried the force of a spiritual conversion, "There's something you all need to know, something that has completely changed my life in the last 8 months." The ballroom exploded in nervous murmurs. Victoria paled as if all blood had drained from her body, her perfectly manicured hands flying to her pearl necklace in an unconscious gesture of protection. Isabella Montgomery felt her world crumble, her dreams of becoming Lady Sterling evaporating like morning mist. "For the last 8 months," Alexander continued, his voice growing in strength and conviction. "I have been studying Islam, not for her, but because I found a truth, a peace, a purpose that my wealth and privileges could never give me." What followed Alexander's declaration was chaos that Charleston had never witnessed in its aristocratic halls. The initial silence was replaced by a cacophony of indignant voices, chairs being pushed back abruptly, and the sound of high heels against marble as some guests literally ran for the exits. Ladies of Southern high society fanned themselves frantically with ivory fans, as if Alexander's words had raised the ballroom's temperature to unbearable levels. Men in $5,000 tuxedos shouted simultaneously, creating a discordant symphony of aristocratic indignation. Victoria Sterling would not accept this betrayal silently. Her scream of horror echoed through the mansion's corridors. "You've completely lost your sanity. You're being manipulated by this terrorist who used brainwashing to access our fortune." Her words were pointed like stilettos, designed to wound and destroy. In the days following that explosive night, she transformed the East Wing of the Sterling Mansion into a veritable military operations center, complete with teams of lawyers, private investigators, and public relations experts working 24 hours a day. Her mission was clear and relentless: to legally prove that Alexander was being victimized by religious brainwashing by a dangerous extremist who had infiltrated their home with nefarious purposes. She spent more than $2 million in just the first week, hiring the country's best private detectives to investigate every moment of Rania's life in Malaysia, every family connection, every friendship, looking for any link, however tenuous, with organizations that could be labeled as suspicious. Isabella Montgomery became Victoria's fiercest and most venomous ally, embracing her role as romantic victim with the dedication of a Hollywood actress. She gave tearful interviews to sensationalist tabloids, her blonde and fragile beauty deliberately contrasting with sinister descriptions of Rania. "I lost the love of my life to Islamic extremism," she cried for national cameras, her tears perfectly timed. Alexander Sterling was a good, generous man, American to the core. Now he's been transformed into something unrecognizable by a woman who seduced him with promises of eternal paradise. While the sensationalist media painted Rania Hassan as a calculating manipulator and potential domestic terrorist, the truth about her extraordinary story began to emerge through independent investigations conducted by ethical journalists and human rights organizations. Each revelation debunked the venomous narratives constructed by Victoria and Isabella, exposing a reality that was simultaneously more complex and more inspiring than any fiction. Rania wasn't the simple and vulnerable domestic worker that her enemies expected to easily destroy. Graduated magna cum laude in international relations from the prestigious University of Kuala Lumpur, she fluently mastered 6 languages: Malay, Arabic, English, Mandarin, French, and Spanish, and had been accepted into master's programs at both Oxford and Harvard before making the devastating decision to leave everything behind. The reason she abandoned a promising career in international diplomacy wasn't poverty or ambition for American wealth, as her detractors maliciously suggested. The truth was simultaneously more painful and more heroic. Rania had fled from an arranged marriage with a violent and politically influential man in Malaysia, a deal her own parents had negotiated in exchange for payment of family debts accumulated during the Asian economic crisis. Documents obtained by investigative journalists revealed that the suitor chosen by her family had a documented history of domestic violence against 2 previous wives, including a hospitalization for multiple fractures that was deliberately covered up by local authorities through generous bribes. Grace Thompson, the housekeeper, who had become more than a supervisor to Rania, she was a maternal confidant and fierce protector, revealed touching details that completely humanized the young Muslim woman in the eyes of the American public. She told how Rania religiously sent 80% of her modest salary to Malaysia, not to sustain personal luxuries, but to fully fund her younger sister Fatima's medical studies, a brilliant student who dreamed of becoming a pediatric surgeon to help needy children in Kuala Lumpur. The legal battle between Victoria Sterling and her son took an absolutely shocking turn when forensic investigators specializing in financial crimes discovered a corruption network that extended for more than a decade. Documents found in Victoria's private vaults revealed that she had systematically embezzled more than $40 million from the Sterling Foundation, an organization supposedly dedicated to childhood education and humanitarian aid, to offshore personal accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. But the most devastating and morally repugnant discovery was yet to come. Meticulously organized bank records showed that Victoria had donated enormous sums to extremist organizations that persecuted religious minorities around the world. Among the beneficiaries of her secret generosity were groups that supported Uyghur concentration camps in China, anti-Muslim militias in Myanmar, and white supremacist organizations in the United States that promoted violence against immigrants and religious minorities. Grace Thompson was the unlikely heroine who made these revelations possible. During decades working silently in the Sterling Mansion's corridors, she had observed, documented, and carefully preserved evidence of Victoria's crimes. "I kept every compromising document for more than 15 years, she declared in a deposition that was broadcast live and instantly went viral on social media. "I could no longer watch that woman destroy innocent lives while financing genocide and preaching about Christian values. My conscience no longer allowed this complicit silence." The irony was brutal, poetic, and absolutely devastating. Victoria Sterling, who had publicly accused Rania Hassan of Islamic extremism and domestic terrorism, was literally financing authoritarian regimes that massacred innocent Muslims around the globe. The scandal exploded in international headlines within hours. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, all major news networks in the world covered the story as breaking news. Protests erupted simultaneously in front of the Sterling Mansion, but this time the protesters carried signs in support of Alexander and Rania, demanding justice for the victims of Victoria's financial crimes. Alexander Sterling could have used the devastating revelations about his mother's crimes to destroy her completely, both legally and socially. Any competent lawyer would have advised a ruthless strategy: maximum media exposure, full criminal prosecution, total asset forfeiture, and permanent social banishment. Public opinion was on his side, the law was on his side, basic morality was on his side. Victoria had betrayed not just the family, but fundamental principles of humanity and decency. But Alexander's response shocked even his most fervent and cynical critics. At a press conference that was broadcast live to more than 50 countries, he appeared alongside Rania, wearing simple clothes instead of his custom Italian suits, their hands intertwined in a gesture of unbreakable unity. "Islam taught me something that capitalism, aristocratic education, and privilege never could," he declared, his voice firm but gentle, "the transformative power of genuine forgiveness. My mother committed terrible crimes against humanity. She financed hatred, promoted genocide, and betrayed everything our family should represent. But she's still my mother, and Allah, may He be glorified, teaches us that vengeance belongs to Him, while mercy and forgiveness belong to us, His servants." Alexander took a deep breath, his next words carrying the weight of a decision that would define not just his character, but his legacy. "I will personally pay all necessary restitutions to the victims of my mother's crimes. I will completely restructure our family foundation to ensure absolute transparency and independent oversight." Rania, at his side, added with a voice that combined strength and gentleness in a way that touched hearts around the world. "We forgive Victoria Sterling not because she deserves our forgiveness. Her crimes were heinous and unforgivable by human standards. We forgive because our hearts deserve the peace that comes only through genuine forgiveness. We forgive because Allah commands us to be better than those who harmed us." Her words generated viral hashtags like #TrueForgiveness and #IslamicCompassion that trended worldwide for weeks. Victoria Sterling's fall from respected matriarch of Southern society to exposed international criminal was devastating, humiliating, and paradoxically necessary for her spiritual salvation. Confronted not just with irrefutable evidence of her crimes, but also with the extraordinary magnanimity demonstrated by the son she had tried to destroy, Victoria finally found herself forced to face the monstrous reality of who she had become over decades of unquestioned privilege and nurtured prejudice. Voluntarily admitted to a psychological and spiritual rehabilitation clinic in Vermont, far from the media spotlight and Charleston's social pressure, she spent 8 months in intensive therapy, systematically deconstructing layers and layers of racism, Islamophobia, classism, and white supremacy that had defined her worldview since childhood. The process was excruciating, often painful beyond description, but gradually transformative in ways she never imagined possible. "My greatest mistake, my deepest sin," she admitted in a public letter published in the New York Times 8 months after her admission, "was confusing family tradition with systematic intolerance, ancestral pride with racial supremacy, and Christian values with religious hatred. I spent decades building a fortress of prejudices around my heart, and when my son found love and purpose outside that fortress, I reacted like a wounded animal attacking everything that threatened my distorted worldview." Her redemption journey was documented by clinic therapists and chaplains as one of the most profound cases of spiritual transformation they had ever witnessed. Victoria began studying not just about Islam, not to convert, but to genuinely understand the faith that had brought so much peace to her son, but also about the history of religions, comparative philosophy, and the psychology of prejudice. Isabella Montgomery, by contrast, completely disappeared from public life after being exposed as an active accomplice in Victoria's schemes, with rumors suggesting she had moved to Europe to escape both social shame and possible criminal prosecution for complicity and conspiracy. Alexander and Rania married in a ceremony that literally made global history and redefined the standards of interreligious and intercultural celebrations. Held at the Central Grand Mosque of Charleston, a modest building that had been built just 5 years earlier by a small community of Muslim immigrants, the ceremony was broadcast live to more than 80 countries through an unprecedented collaboration between Al Jazeera, CNN International, and BBC World Service. What made the event truly extraordinary was the participation of religious leaders from different spiritual traditions who united to bless the union. Imam Abdullah Rahman, who had guided Alexander in his conversion journey to Islam during 8 months of intensive study, officiated the traditional Islamic ceremony. At his side were Rabbi Michael Cohen from the local synagogue, Reverend Sarah Williams from Charleston's historic Baptist Church, and even a Tibetan Buddhist monk who had flown specially from Colorado to represent the universality of spiritual love. Victoria Sterling, still visibly fragile after her months of psychological rehabilitation, arrived supported by an elegant cane, her hands trembling not from age, but from pure emotion. When her turn came to speak during the ceremony, she stood slowly, her tears falling freely as she addressed Rania directly. "Daughter, because now you are truly my daughter. You saved not just my son from an empty life of purposeless privileges, but saved my own soul from the darkness of hatred and prejudice that had consumed me for decades." The couple's honeymoon transformed into an extraordinary humanitarian journey that took them through Rania's native Malaysia, then to refugee camps in Jordan, underfunded medical clinics in Morocco, and forgotten orphanages in Bangladesh. At each stop, Alexander used his considerable wealth and business connections to fund schools, hospitals, community development programs, and microcredit initiatives that directly benefited thousands of needy families. Documentaries were produced about this altruistic honeymoon, inspiring an entire generation of wealthy young people to rethink how they would use their privileges. 3 years after the wedding that shocked Charleston, the Sterling business empire had undergone such a radical transformation that economists from Harvard and Oxford studied the case as a revolutionary model of ethical capitalism and corporate social responsibility. Alexander completely restructured all family businesses, strictly following Islamic principles of ethical finance, eliminating any investment in harmful industries like alcohol, gambling, pornography, or weapons. The most ambitious project was the creation of Sterling Islamic Bank, the first large-scale Islamic financial institution in the southern United States. The bank offered interest-free loans to small entrepreneurs from ethnic minorities, financed sustainable technology startups, and created a special housing fund that allowed Muslim families to buy homes without violating their religious beliefs about riba, usury. In just 2 years, the bank had helped more than 2,000 families achieve the dream of homeownership. Rania, now graduated magna cum laude in human rights from Harvard Kennedy School, with all educational costs proudly funded by her husband, became one of the most globally respected voices in defending the rights of Muslim women and religious minorities. Her lectures at the UN, her appearances at prestigious universities, and her academic articles were translated into dozens of languages. She founded the Rania Hassan Foundation, an organization that specifically combated Islamophobia through education, intercultural dialogue, and student exchange programs. The Sterling mansion had been partially converted into a revolutionary Islamic cultural center that offered free courses on different world religions, promoted weekly interreligious dialogues, and actively combated all types of prejudices through education and direct experience. Charleston, a historically conservative city often resistant to social changes, surprised the world by becoming a national model of religious tolerance, cultural integration, and inter-community cooperation. The birth of Aisha Noor Sterling Hassan marked not just the beginning of a new generation, but symbolized tangible hope for a world where cultural and religious differences could be celebrated instead of feared. When Alexander held his newborn daughter for the first time at Charleston Medical Center, his hands trembling with emotion, he whispered the Adhan, Islamic call to prayer, in her right ear according to millennial tradition, his tears of joy falling on the baby's perfect little face. The name chosen for the girl carried deep meanings in multiple cultures. Aisha honored one of Prophet Muhammad's most respected wives, known for her intelligence and leadership, while Noor meant light in Arabic, a light her parents hoped would shine through the darkness of prejudice and intolerance. Hassan connected the child to Rania's Malaysian family roots, keeping alive the Asian heritage that had almost been lost due to the traumatic circumstances that brought her mother to America. Victoria Sterling, now completely transformed into a dedicated grandmother who surprised everyone with her devotion, spent months learning basic Arabic so she could communicate with her granddaughter when she grew up. She studied traditional Malaysian cuisine with private lessons, preparing special dishes for Rania during the postpartum period, according to Asian confinement customs. Even more impressive, Victoria became one of the fiercest defenders of Muslim rights in Charleston, using her residual social influence to combat Islamophobia whenever she encountered it. The multicultural education planned for Aisha became a model studied by international pedagogues. She would grow up trilingual, speaking English, Arabic, and Malay fluently from childhood. Her upbringing would include respectful celebrations of both Christian Christmas and Islamic festivals like Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. She would learn about Jesus Christ and Prophet Muhammad with equal reverence and love, study Eastern and Western philosophies, and be raised to see diversity not as an obstacle, but as incomparable wealth. 5 years after the fateful dinner where Victoria brutally tore off Rania's hijab, the same Sterling mansion was the scene of a celebration that completely symbolized the radical transformation that had occurred not just in a family, but in an entire community. Alexander organized a special event he called the Unity Festival, an annual celebration that would become tradition in Charleston, bringing together people from all religious, ethnic, and socio-economic backgrounds. The grand ballroom where the humiliation had happened was now decorated with peace symbols from different spiritual traditions: Islamic crescents, Christian crosses, Jewish stars, Taoist yin-yang symbols, and Buddhist mandalas, all intertwined in artistic harmony. Syrian refugees who had been resettled in Charleston through the Sterling Refugee Foundation shared tables with oil magnates. Orphaned children from Bangladesh, visiting the United States through cultural exchange programs funded by the family, played happily with American billionaires' children. Victoria, now president of the Human Rights Council of the reformed Sterling Foundation, gave a speech that was broadcast internationally and went viral on social media. Exactly 5 years ago, in this very sacred place, I committed the worst sin of my life. Moved by hatred, ignorance, and fear, I tore off the sacred hijab of an innocent young Muslim woman, violating not just her religious dignity, but betraying everything that Jesus Christ taught us about loving our neighbor. Alexander, now with a carefully trimmed beard according to Islamic tradition, and wearing clothes that mixed Western elegance with Islamic modesty, held his daughter Aisha, now a precocious 4-year-old, who spoke 3 languages fluently and recited both Quranic verses and biblical stories with equal ease. This hall witnessed the cruelest face of human prejudice, he declared, his voice echoing through the same room where everything had begun. But today, it witnesses the infinite power of Allah's love and the human capacity for transformation through faith, forgiveness, and unity. The extraordinary story of Rania Hassan and Alexander Sterling teaches us profound truths about human nature, the power of genuine faith, and the capacity we all possess for radical transformation, no matter how deeply we are rooted in prejudices or hatred. A brutal public humiliation became the catalyst for social change that spread far beyond Charleston's borders, inspiring similar movements of tolerance and interreligious unity in dozens of American and international cities. Victoria Sterling proved that it's never too late to confront our inner demons and choose redemption over condemnation, love over hatred, humility over arrogance. Her transformation from prejudiced matriarch to passionate human rights defender demonstrates that even the most hardened hearts can be touched by divine grace when they're willing to open themselves to truth. Alexander showed that true privilege doesn't come from inherited money, but from the moral responsibility to use resources and influence to elevate others, especially those who are marginalized and oppressed. Rania Hassan personified the unbreakable dignity that cannot be destroyed by external attacks, the strength that comes from authentic faith, and the wisdom that transforms personal suffering into universal purpose. She demonstrated that true victory isn't in defeating enemies, but in transforming them through the example of impeccable character and genuine forgiveness. Little Aisha Sterling Hassan represents the tangible hope of a future where religious, cultural, and ethnic diversity won't be a source of conflict, but of incomparable wealth for all humanity. Her existence is living proof that true love transcends all artificial barriers when grounded in faith, mutual respect, and justice. If this story has deeply touched your heart and awakened your consciousness to the urgent need to combat prejudices in our own lives and communities, then share this video immediately in all your WhatsApp groups, social networks, and with every person you know. Powerful stories like this need to be told and retold millions of times to build bridges of understanding where others insist on building walls of division. Your simple action of sharing can plant seeds of tolerance, love, and acceptance in hearts that don't yet know the transformative beauty of human diversity. Share right now and become an active part of this silent revolution of love that the world desperately needs.